In July 2014, Conrad Roy III, aged 18, died by suicide in Fairhaven, Massachusetts. He sat in his pickup truck and died from carbon monoxide poisoning. Conrad had a documented history of depression and anxiety, and this was not a sudden or isolated crisis, and this becomes important later on. At that time, he was in a long-distance, text message heavy relationship with Michelle Carter, then 17, and their relationship existed largely in a fantasy space. It was digital, it was long distance, and it was highly emotional, and it was being run by two ungrounded adolescents. They were both in their teens. It was very emotionally intense, and it was poorly grounded in any sort of real world containment, and they weren't receiving negative feedback from reality when they inevitably, as two teenagers would, started coloring outside the lines and blurring the proper boundaries between reality and fantasy. In the months leading up to his death, Michelle Carter sent dozens of text messages explicitly encouraging Conrad Roy to kill himself. The year that this happened, it didn't start like that. So in the early part of 2014, when he mentioned his suicidal ideation, she was actively discouraging him and trying to give him reasons to live and to be hopeful. And it looks like around early June, she switched from that strategy to actively encouraging him. These messages are not ambiguous, they're not metaphorical, and they're not vague suggestions. At points, there are times where she gives him very direct, violent even, instructions, even including on how he should and could end his own life. These were not momentary expressions of anger after a fight. These were not moments of shared despair where they both sat there and, had an emo moment as teenagers will do, as I did, as I'm sure we all did, saying, oh, life is hard, life is awful, life is cruel. It would just be better if we were dead. It wasn't like that. It was very premeditated and very cold and very consistent and repetitive. And I think when people read that and see that, that's where the moral outrage comes from. That's where my moral outrage came from. Because I'm thinking, how could anybody possibly be so cruel and be so determined as to encourage somebody to do one of the worst things imaginable, not just to himself, but to the entire network of people around him, as dysfunctional or functional or well-meaning or not so well-meaning as they may or may not be, as is the case in all human networks. It would have a long or permanent negative impact on them. So these suggestions were direct, concrete, and at times violent, and it included a message in which he wrote,
hang yourself, jump off a building, stub yourself. I don't know, there are lots of ways.
The language matters, it's active encouragement, and I'm telling you so that we're not softening the facts of the case. You're probably getting the tone already of, this is true, and yet. So you're probably wondering, well, what's the and yet going to be? How's he going to defend this awful behavior? I'm not, but I want to add something to the conversation. Ethically speaking, let's be clear, this is morally reprehensible behavior. The ethical judgment is clear and it does not waver, but the ethics of the situation, the law, are not in the same domain. Conrad, on the day that he went through with taking his own life, he actually panicked and exited the truck as it was filling with carbon monoxide and said to Michelle, I don't want to do it. And she told him to get back in and to finish the job, which is really where the core of the moral horror of this story lies. She had a consistent, but on that day particular, mocking and contemptuous tone towards his hesitation. She'd say things like, I knew you wouldn't do it. I knew you couldn't follow through with it, almost suggesting he wasn't man enough to do it. He promises to do things and he doesn't stick to it. He's that kind of a person. He's that kind of a man. What we have is a clear distinction between the documented facts of the case, her later admissions, and the reported text tone. Where wording is not verbatim text, but trial testimony or paraphrase, is a lot of what we have in the media, which is an editorialized version of what was said, which is fine, but this is one of the problems of the case. If I say to somebody, kill yourself, is that the same thing as me picking up a gun and shooting them dead? Obviously not. Is it possible to say things in content that have a different meaning in context and meta communication? Yes, we'll speak more about that in just a moment. So sadly, on that day, he did go through with killing himself. When I saw the facts of this case, I was horrified. I was thinking, what a cold-hearted, psychopathic, narcissistic, and sadistic thing to do and to say. And that hasn't changed. I think the actions are narcissistic, psychopathic, sadistic. They speak of dark tetrad behavior, but that doesn't mean necessarily that the person has a pathology, especially when you're talking about a 17-year-old. So I was very, very angry and upset, and I think most people would be, and the reaction is human. When we hear language like this directed at a vulnerable person, there is a visceral response. You know, you put yourself perhaps in the position of being his parent and being horrified that somebody could say that to your child. But that is not a legal issue. That's a psychological issue. It's a philosophical issue, but not a legal one. The fact is that in America, you have the right to behave like an asshole. And this is covered by the Constitution. It's your First Amendment right. The Constitution was written after the War of Independence, in which America won its freedom from what it considered to be British tyranny. So this is an anti-tyrannical document. And the First Amendment covers your freedom of speech. You can't, if you're in a position of authority, you can't do that. You know that that's a particularly vulnerable person and there's going to be a negative outcome. But the law is hazy here. I was shocked to find how hazy the law is. So let's go into that. Because the law is hazy and because there isn't a law in America nor in the UK that covers what we should do with somebody who says to a person who's vulnerable and in a vulnerable psychological state and is saying, I want to kill myself, there isn't a law that covers you saying, well, you should kill yourself. There's harassment laws, there's stalking laws, but this wasn't harassment or stalking. This was an ongoing consensual situation. And so she was tried and found guilty by a judge, not by a jury, of involuntary manslaughter.
This court, having reviewed the evidence and applied the law thereto, now finds you guilty.
Guilty of involuntary manslaughter. Her weapon? Text messages urging 18-year-old Roy to take his life through carbon monoxide poisoning inside his pickup truck.
She served around 11 months because I think in that state, if you behave well, your sentence is reduced by 30%. And so she was released in early 2020. She's avoided public commentary since, and the shortness of the sentence does not mean the precedent itself is small. Let's do a short philosophical exercise and take ourselves away from Michelle Carter and Conrad Roy. It's a science fiction novel. And there's two people in the novel, and they are young people. We'll just call him young man and young lady. Young man keeps saying, I want to die. I want to be dead. I want to kill myself. In a relationship that is long distance, they're not seeing each other face to face. It's all happening via text. And he says that over and over and over again to that young lady. He has attempted suicide in the past, and it was unsuccessful suicide. And he keeps saying that he wants to do it. Imagine we're novelists, we're writing a novel in a parallel universe, a sci-fi parallel universe. What do we imagine would be the effect on an adolescent mind? That even your brain hasn't finished developing at age 17. Your mind certainly hasn't. Your moral boundaries certainly haven't. I myself could not fathom telling someone, even when I was 13 or 12, who wanted to kill themselves, that they should. But that's not what's at question here. What's at question here, if we pull focus and say, okay, as a reasonable civilized society, under the circumstances described, where young man keeps on saying to young lady, I'm going to kill myself, I'm going to kill myself, Please don't kill yourself. Please don't kill yourself. And the cycle just goes and goes and goes. What would be the effect on her? What's the emotional weight on her? And what could be the potential emotional impact across months of that? I don't think his intent was to abuse her, and calling that relationship abusive would be controversial, because then you'd have to say, well, where exactly is the line between abusive or a vulnerable person just expressing how they feel? As an adult, as a psychologically informed coach who's worked with adolescents, what would I say? I would say, hey, you can't tell your friend or your boyfriend or your girlfriend, yeah, go ahead and kill yourself. It's just outrageous. It's a totally irresponsible thing to do. What you can do is say to them, I'm not equipped to cope with this. You don't need a girlfriend. You don't need a friend. You need a therapist. Go and speak to an adult. Go and ask for help. Go and get help. But there's no point in me talking to you anymore because I'm not qualified. I'm not equipped. I'm 16. I'm 17. Take this to somebody who can deal with it, because you're dropping a very heavy moral and psychological load in, frankly, a weak person's lap. We're all weak when we're adolescents. We're all weak when we're children. We're still weak when we're young adults. I'm not justifying what she did, but I'm saying let's just note here in our philosophical sci-fi scenario that young lady is in a very strange situation psychologically, and that young man, let's not say it's abusive, because maybe he really was just saying how he felt. Maybe he wasn't addicted to attention. Maybe he wasn't struggling with vulnerable narcissism or borderline personality disorder, where he needed to extract narcissistic supply from his target by frightening them. Because it's frightening when somebody says they're going to kill themselves. By bullying them, because it's bullying when you constantly say, I'm going to kill myself, I'm going to hurt myself, I'm going to damage myself, or I'm going to go and damage other people. It's effectively a form of emotional terrorism. Now, he may not have known that, but an informed adult who's psychologically informed, who operates as a coach or a school guidance counselor or something like that, could say, listen, son, what you're doing, it might not be abuse, but it's damn sure unfair. It's very unfair what you're doing. You can't dump this in this young lady's lap again and again and again across months. That's not reasonable. So where do we, as a civilized society, as presumably a group of well-meaning adults, step in and protect young people? I would have preferred it personally. We would all prefer it personally, presumably, upstream of the situation. Maybe adolescents need to be told, educated on how to deal with their own emotions and how to deal with communicating with friends who are struggling with mental health issues and with emotional burdens. In fact, now that I've said it, that's actually a really good idea. That would actually be a really good addition to the syllabus. How should young people process their own emotions, their own mental health issues, and how should it be spoken about? How should I'm a young person tell my friends when I'm struggling? And how should I, as a young person, receive the information about another person's struggles? I mean, most of us really don't know how to do this well as adults, right? We don't. Let's take a bad faith perspective here now on what happened with Michelle Carter. I don't know. I'm not psychic. I have no idea what she was going through. I've never spoken to her. I'm approaching this philosophically. Let's just say that this is as if. Let's take a bad faith perspective. She got frustrated with Conrad. She got irritated with Conrad. The emotional load and the guilt transubstantiated into aggression, transubstantiated into sadism. She couldn't deal with it. She was sick of it. She was sick of him saying this. She was sick of the roller coaster, the highs and lows. I'm going to kill myself. I'm going to kill myself. I'm going to kill myself. And so, I don't know, some kind of an internal collapse. So that's one level of bad faith interpretation. Let's have a worse faith interpretation, even worse faith interpretation. Very bad faith interpretation. The aggression and the frustration and resentment solidified into something even darker. Opportunism. If I'm the girlfriend of a boyfriend who's killed himself, I get a lot of attention. I'd get a lot of sympathy. I would be very famous at school. Before we all start scapegoating and wagging our fingers and casting the first stone, just take yourself back. Just take a breath. Don't think as a parent. Don't think as a teacher. Don't think as somebody who would protect young people, especially in a case like this? Of course. Just go back to high school. Just go back to secondary school. When you were 15, 16, 17, did you have fantasies of fame? Did you have fantasies of being the most popular person at school? Did you have fantasies of doing something or having something done to you that made you the center of attention? Ah, yes. Do you remember them? It's normative narcissism. It's part of the developmental process. It's not clinical. It's not pathological. But the strong urge to be the center of attention, yes, there's a gender issue in this, but broadly speaking, I worked with adolescents for 5 or 6 years, and I was only 26. I was only 10 years out of adolescence, but so much had happened in my life. I had to rebuild the bridge back to being a teenager to understand where they were coming from. And when I did that, it worked. And I found the number one currency amongst young people, adolescents, is being cool. It's not being successful. It's not doing well in life, because that doesn't mean anything when all you've known is your parents' house and school. These are vague, highfalutin concepts. We talk the talk as a 16-year-old, 17-year-old. Oh, yes, sir, I want to be a doctor. But you don't know what being a doctor. Yes, I want a wife and children. You don't know what that means. How could you? And what I'm meandering towards here is there is an unreality to adolescence. There's an unreality to being in secondary school. We all lived it. There's a strange, high-strung, high-pitched quality to the life of 15 to 21-year-olds, quite frankly. Your hormones are at their peak. Your body is telling you, procreate, procreate, procreate. The sex drive is through the roof. The desire to be seen, the desire to be heard, to be cool, to be the center of attention is strong. Even when you're introverted, extroverted, whichever, there's that drive that's there. Emotions run high. And I will say something gendered here. Adolescent girls have a tendency towards the dramatic and towards manipulation. This is a generalization. Adolescent boys have a tendency towards open displays of aggression. But these are both drives toward social hierarchy, are they not? Boys are wrestling with each other. They're punching each other in the arm. They're loud. They're competitive. They're shoving each other around when they play football or whatever they do. Girls, they sharpen their claws. They learn that they can't use their physical weight to compete in the social hierarchy, and very few people would reward them for that, even if they did. But they can control signals, they can control communication, and they can control language. My really bad faith interpretation of what maybe happened here, don't know her, never met her, never interviewed her, could be that the aggression and resentment that she started to feel through this emotional roller coaster that this vulnerable young man, who, whether he had the intent to abuse or not, I don't care. They're too young for me to condemn them morally for life, both of them. If he was deliberately abusive, I'm not going to condemn him in the same way that I cannot find it within me to morally condemn for life a 17-year-old. They're both too young. They're too neuroplastic, and they're too salvageable. They're both too salvageable. Let's say he was abusive with intent, same effect. He wasn't abusive. He was just desperate. Or it had become a habit pattern. Or maybe it's a mix of both. Maybe it exists in a gray area where he's thinking, I get a certain kind of attention when I say this, and I'm really craving for that attention. So is that naughty? Is it evil? Is it sure? What's it? The driving impulse behind it? Lack of love, lack of attention, lack of care. I don't know. Did he do it? Yes, he did. We have the facts of the case. Did she do what she did? Yes, she did. The question is why? We can never really know. It's not possible to know. And that's not the realm of the law. That's the realm of psychology and philosophy. Worst case interpretation. Anger built up, resentment built up, it solidified into aggression and frustration, and that's solidified into opportunism. I now want him to do this because it will take me off this roller coaster that I'm not enjoying. Plus, if he follows through with it and actually does it, I will be the most famous and important person in school, probably until I leave, in a certain very dark way. What I'm suggesting is at a systems thinking level here, we can say there are incentives for both. but particularly for her in this case. Let's talk about the legality, because I learned something here. So in this kind of a case, homicide is the overall category. Homi just means human, side means death. You have murder, which is intent. I intend for somebody to die, I take an action, and they die. Murder. Voluntary manslaughter involves intent. It typically is in the heat of passion. So it lacks that cold, calculating element, or it's not as cold and calculated. So then you would have voluntary manslaughter. Involuntary manslaughter, there's no intent to kill, but death results from reckless or criminally negligent action. So she was tried for involuntary manslaughter. So if I'm drunk at a party and I'm swinging around a loaded shotgun and accidentally it goes off and I kill someone, that's an action that I took. Or I'm driving, I'm doing donuts. Let's keep it in the world of the adolescent. I'm doing donuts in the parking lot and a drunk boy or girl steps forward and I kill them. That would be, and I'm drunk, involuntary manslaughter. There's no intent to kill, but death results from criminally negligent action. So was she criminally negligent? I mean, from a moral and ethical point, yes. But your right to say terrible things to people is protected by the First Amendment. I want to do two things philosophically and psychologically now that relate to the way in which we can think about this. What if her defense had said, Your Honor, my client's intent was to push him to fight back. He kept on saying he didn't want to live. He kept on saying he wanted to die. And she'd read in a book, this 17-year-old girl had read in a book and misunderstood and misinterpreted and wasn't qualified to use it and didn't realize that you never use that in a case of suicide. It's extremely dangerous and would be massively irresponsible. I'm now talking as me to you. But Your Honor, her intention was good. She thought if she said to him, whenever he said, I'm going to kill myself, if she said, oh, please don't kill yourself, there's so much to live for, she was repeating the loop, the cycle, and the cycle would never end. So she read in a book, the book is about reverse psychology in a different context, how to break the loop. Turn around and say to him, yes, okay, go on, kill yourself. Yeah, go ahead and do it. As she said, you can jump off a bridge, you could shoot yourself, you could stab yourself. There's loads of ways to do it. I don't know, just get on with it with the intent that it would reverse the psychology, the psychological dynamic, such that he turns around and says, hey, F you, I'm not going to put my family and friends through that. I came here for support. Why are you talking that way? You shouldn't talk that way to people. To compel him to find the courage to defend his right to live. Had they gone that route, obviously it would be a stretch and it would be absurd. But the court would still need to hear that. I'm saying this because if you've done something or said something, and I say there's a magic 6-worded phrase that you used that caused a terrible event in the world, but my potential defense is that's not what she meant. Imagine you, the viewer now, you write on a social media post a 6-worded phrase and someone reads that 6-worded phrase and a terrible event occurs. And I can argue that that was not your intention. The intention was the opposite. You were being ironic. You meant the opposite. And you thought it was such an outrageous statement that you made that it would be clear that you meant its opposite. If I can present that as the defense, doesn't that mean that the context changes the intention? And the intention is reflected in the context, not the content of the words, right? Or put another way, to be really graphic, hashtag trigger warning, I guess, I say, I hate you, I'm going to kill you. I pick up a gun, I chamber a round, I point it at you and pop. That's an action I've taken. I can't argue it was a joke or, oh, I was trying to frighten you into changing your behavior. I mean, people have tried. It doesn't fly. The jury, the judge is not going to accept as a defense. I said, I hate you, I'm going to kill you. I pointed a loaded gun at you and said, I'm going to kill you now and pulled the trigger. I can't say, or I mean, I could, I suppose, if I was cheeky. I meant to fire over your head. I meant to fire into the ground. That's not the same thing. You're an idiot. You're an idiot. Get off me, you idiot. Don't do that, you idiot. Don't do that, you idiot. You're going to hurt yourself. Same words, different intentions. This is an action. I chambered a round of a gun and point at you. That's an action. That's hard to defend. Words, don't know. Were you being ironic? Were you using reverse psychology? Do you understand what I'm driving at here? It sets a very dangerous legal precedent if we're going to say, no, every single time someone says, I wish you were dead, or I think you should kill yourself, it means that they literally want you to die. And what? They have the magical power to make you do that? Do you all remember? It's less now, but there was a period in time of internet history and internet meme culture where telling people as a form of trolling or as a form of saying, I don't like what you've posted, 2017, people online, especially young people, would just say, this content is trash, kill yourself. This song sucks, kill yourself. This video is shit, kill yourself. And it got used so frequently that on YouTube and on Instagram, it was reduced to KYS, right? So if over here we say, if you tell someone to kill yourself, that's involuntary manslaughter, then everyone who says kill yourself is guilty of involuntary manslaughter. And if this is taking place in an American context, the FBI would be rather busy and they would fail to arrest all the people who are saying that online. I mean, it's not a reasonable legal precedent to set. If there's no action, there's no manslaughter, voluntary or involuntary. And here's a funny thing. If they're going to try her for manslaughter, what they're saying is, your words caused his death. Why is it involuntary manslaughter? She's saying, so we've established legally, your words caused death, but you did it involuntarily. No. If we're saying the words are manslaughter, it's not involuntary, surely, it's voluntary. But if we're saying it's manslaughter, then she's not turning donuts in a crowded parking lot full of drunk kids, going, oh, I'm just saying kill yourself out into the internet. Kill yourself, kill yourself, kill yourself. And it's picked up by one person. No, it would have to be voluntary because she's targeting one person, not after an argument, not after in the heat of the moment, again and again for months. So she should have been tried, surely then, for voluntary manslaughter. Now, obviously, I don't believe there's any manslaughter here because no action was taken. And that's United States law. First Amendment protects your freedom of speech. You can be an asshole in America and not get arrested. You can say horrible things in America and not be arrested because it's an anti-tyranny law. The idea is I can say F you to the king, F you to the king's tax collectors, F you to the king's subjects, F you to the king's rule, the king's word, the king's army, F you, and no one can stop me. So words are not actions. And if they are, then why is this involuntary? Because involuntary would mean there's no intent to kill, and yet you killed with your magically powered words, we're assuming in this case. You've got two things there. If the words are not actions, then there's no action there, then there cannot be any manslaughter. And if this is going to be considered voluntary or involuntary, to me it seems by its own deformed logic, it should be voluntary, then everybody who's ever said it ever is now guilty of involuntary, by the legal precedent set here, but should be voluntary manslaughter. Everyone. The last thing I want to say on that legal point is he took the action. What she said was awful. She should have called the police. She should have called his parents. She should have said, stop, turn it off, go home, see a therapist, whatever. Morally reprehensible, but he was already highly suicidal. People who talk about suicide, people who have a lot of active suicidal ideation, it's called in psychology. I'm sorry to say it like this, it's like practice, the non-successful attempts. They go forward, they come back, they go forward, they come back, they go forward, they come back. And then it's highly, highly likely, you can look at the psychological literature yourself, that a young man, as tragic as it is, in Conrad Roy's case, even if she'd blocked him and said, go see a therapist, based on the series of events and the pattern of behavior that he displayed up until that point, it's not definite, but say if you compare him to the baseline population, the normative statistical baseline population for men his age just in Massachusetts, he is orders of magnitude more likely to kill himself than the baseline population. He would have been considered clinically very, very high risk for suicide. Had she blocked him months before, had she not said all of this, and this was part of her defense, the defense lawyers brought that up, had she done it or not, this is the most likely outcome. Awful. Hate saying that. I watched a video of him talking today. Intelligent, sensitive young man had reached this psychological dead end where he thought this was the only option available to him. But he put himself there. She didn't put him there. What she did and said was wrong, but absolutely she didn't pull the trigger. So let's look at his psychological context a little bit deeper. He was not psychologically stable. He was struggling with chronic depression, anxiety. He expressed hopelessness repeatedly. He vacillated, hesitated, backed out, and returned to suicidal ideation many times. He was vulnerable, dependent, and searching for reassurance. The responsibility for suicide, tragically, when it happens, rests with the person who dies, or else it is not suicide. The strange thing here is we're holding legally, and I suppose philosophically, two things to be true at once. He killed himself and she also caused his death. And I don't think in this case you can say that. He took his own life. She damn sure didn't help. She saw a young man drowning and didn't do anything. It would be like watching somebody drowning in a river and not calling the police. Now, I'm not obliged to jump in there with you legally. I don't even know if there's a legal obligation. I presume there's a legal obligation, like a good citizen law, where you should, like if you don't go and get help when you see somebody drowning, I'm sure you would be in some legal trouble for that. But it is not true that he took his own life and that she also took his life. It can't be. It can't be. And nobody I've seen in this case is saying, no, it wasn't suicide. He didn't commit suicide. Everybody agrees, yes, he committed suicide. Well, if he committed suicide, how could she have committed manslaughter at the same time? It's like Schrodinger's incident. It's both. Somehow here, it's magically, in the quantum realm, it's both. And I don't think that makes sense. Michelle Carter's psychology. So I personally don't see evidence of narcissistic personality disorder or psychopathy in any pathological clinical sense. That doesn't mean that it's not there. I'm saying based on the facts of the case, the very limited little tiny view I have into this human being's world, I do see a normative, narcissistic potential incentive. I do see potential. This is a bad faith interpretation, as I said before. The good faith interpretation would be, or the better faith interpretation would be, she's just a silly little girl, very immature, didn't see him as a real person, because it's only via text. If you want to use the language of narcissism, if you want to, kind of like an internalized self-object, not real. So his actions wouldn't be real. It wouldn't have consequence in the real world. It wouldn't break his mother's heart. His mother wasn't real. The consequences aren't real. Nothing is real. This is like a more of a good faith interpretation. Silly little girl, too emotionally immature to deal with what was going on, said reckless things, wild, honestly, emotionally violent things, 100%, but with nothing else there, with no malicious intent. The bad faith interpretation, as I said earlier, is the resentment solidified into hostility or solidified into aggression, which then transubstantiated into actual hostility and opportunism. And that would make the action narcissistic, psychopathic, Machiavellian, and sadistic. That's a very, very dark interpretation of what she did, because in that scenario, I would be suggesting they mentioned, or he mentioned, Romeo and Juliet, that maybe she was fascinated by the idea of being the center of attention as a tragic character in her school. And her school is her world. She doesn't know anything else because she's only 17 years old. So even if it was the most malicious, nasty thing possible, should she go to prison for that? If you're asking me in a utopian world that I would run, I don't think so. I don't think it would do anything. I don't even think it would help. You know, we need to have a conversation. You need to understand the consequences of your words, the consequences of your actions, but prison. And I suspect that she was sent to prison, possibly against the judge's better judgment, as a way of mollifying an angry mob. And when we talk about angry mobs, you'll see the angry mob in the comments section below, because there's a strong drive to disavow people ritualistically amongst humans. It's called scapegoating. This young lady must bear the sins and the malice and the evil intent and the narcissistic, psychopathic, sadistic, Machiavellian drives of the tribe itself, which absolutely are there. So just a footnote to that, an action can be narcissistic or psychopathic without the person having the clinical pathology of narcissistic psychopathy. I repeat, she may do. I have no way of knowing. Neither do you. You can't judge based on one action that took place once. If it's a consistent pattern of behavior across contexts and across time, then you have something. What I do see here is an adolescent fantasy-based identity. I don't see a consistent pattern of grandiosity, dominance, or instrumental exploitation. We have a period where she was actively encouraging him, but there was a period before where she was actively encouraging him not to commit suicide. So what happened? That is not consistent with a pathology. That's not consistent with a clinical diagnosis of a personality disorder at all. This could be a context-based, it's a unique context, a very unique context-based, malignant response to a psychological pressure that she was ill-equipped to deal with. And yes, the response may have real malice, real hostility, real narcissism inside of it, but that does not a clinical pathology make. In adolescent fantasy logic, the death completes the story. And when we are in adolescence, our drive to be, the young people today call it main character energy. The drive to be the main character is very, very strong. Identity is narrative. We're constantly asking ourselves, who am I in this story? The story of my high school, because we don't know anything else. The high school is the world. And what role do I occupy? And how could I maybe climb this hierarchy? Broadly speaking, males or the yang energy will do it through force and competition and drive. Broadly speaking, if it's negatively aspected, the yin, the more feminine way of getting it done would be through manipulation. And you could argue, if you're taking the bad faith route, that that's what happened here. So this doesn't really require conscious malice. It requires immaturity and a failure to perceive another person as fully real, which is what I think happened here. I repeat, she was 17 at the time of this happening. 17. There may also be an unconscious incentive structure at play, the role of the tragic girlfriend, which would incentivize her because she'd get the reward of sympathy, attention, and moral insulation. This explains some of the callousness of the speech and the emotional blindness. When you read the texts as an adult, like if you're an adult writing that, it would be because you're enormously callous. The corpus callosum isn't properly formed. Adolescents are more effectively psychopathic because the parts of the brain that deal with consequence haven't finished developing yet. I'm not excusing what she did. Ethically, it's repugnant. Morally, it's outrageous. Legally, Conrad Roy was a vulnerable young man who desperately needed help. And Michelle Carter deserves moral condemnation. If you view this through the lens of her being the root cause of his suicide, and then you conclude logically that she's guilty of manslaughter, you've taken logical leaps philosophically, ethically, and legally. What concerns me is not the length of her sentence. As I say, I think the judge probably made a compromise and mollified an angry mob, which is frightening that that could or can happen. That is on her record for life. Manslaughter, involuntary manslaughter, on her record for life. It affects her future friendships, relationships, and employability forevermore. In America, you do have a chance of being pardoned or of having the record expunged, but it's very, very difficult and it's extraordinarily rare. Everybody knows her name. Everybody thinks badly of her. Everybody knows her face. When we start talking about justice, there's the justice that's delivered by the court legally, and then there's the effective justice of being tried in the court of public opinion. The consequences to her, pretty harsh, lifelong and devastating. And you might reply to that by going, yes, but she caused his death. To which I can only repeat, I don't personally believe that that's true. I think what she wrote was awful, as I've said multiple times. He caused his death. And if you say she caused his death, and you strongly believe that, then right below, when he died, it wasn't a suicide. If you believe she caused his death, then you believe that Conrad Roy didn't commit suicide, because it can't be both. Well, I don't know, you believe something odd, which I would love to hear about. If we move that and we say we want a new legal precedent in which speech is effectively carrying the same legal and ethical weight as action, then we also have to say that silence on any issue, or choosing not to speak on any issue you can name, is obedience, is effective support. And I don't want to live in a world where that is the new moral standard that is set. That doesn't sound reasonable to me, legally, ethically, psychologically, or philosophically. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time and for your attention. I'd love to know your comments and your opinions. Please drop them in the comment section below. And I look forward to speaking to you again very soon. Thank you.